Welcome to Introduction to Mobile App Development, Module 5, Adding Customized Behaviors. In this module, we will build upon the concepts from Module 4 by further customizing our sample app. By utilizing Windows Phone features such as the date and time capabilities, we can change our app behavior by checking the date for certain conditions. We will also explore the use of variables to add functionality like controlling the number of times a link can be used. First, let's get an understanding of the date and time capabilities of apps on Windows Phone. One of the conveniences of running on a smartphone is the continuous access to up-to-date information. One key example is an internal clock that is always accurate. Windows phones contain an internal clock that is regularly synchronized with network servers, which ensure the date and time are always accurate. As an app developer, you gain the benefit of being able to access this date and time with the comfort of knowing it is always accurate. With the ready access to date and time, it becomes easy to adjust the behavior of an app based on the date or time. An app can make decisions based on the date or time that can change the behavior of the app. Your app might check the current date to see if it is a particular day, like the user's birthday, and potentially unlock a special feature or display a birthday greeting. Similarly, you might add checks to your app that prohibit the access to the customer support helpline outside of a normal business hours, or you might direct users to a particular website for end-of-week sales or specials. As you can see, using the date or time in an app can enable you to do a number of interesting things. In the last module, we discussed decision structures like the if statement shown here. We learned how an app can make decisions based on values by using comparison operators like the not equal operator, exclamation point, equal sign. The code we used to check to see if the target URI was not empty by comparing it to null. In other words, if target URI is not equal to null, then we ran the code that was inside of the blocks. In this case, all of the code contained inside the squirrely braces is known as a block. So the block of code that would run if target URI was not empty are the two lines that write the debug message and navigate to the URL. Now that you know the structure of a decision statement, you can add more of them to perform other checks and decisions. Let's use a simple example. In Great Britain, it is traditional to say white rabbits on the first day of every month. To support this tradition, we might consider changing our app to display this message for us each month. If we wanted to implement this functionality, how would we determine if it should display the message or not? How do we know if it is the start of the month? We would need to check the current day of the month and see if it is the first day. And when we check the date, the value of the day should be 1. In order to make this type of change, we will need our app to retrieve the current date. The Windows Phone library is comprised of a wealth of different components we can use to perform a wide variety of tasks. These components help you do anything from working with the camera to displaying graphics or accepting input from the user. So far, we've used the debug component to write some debugging messages to the Visual Studio output screen. Now, we're going to use the datetime component to work with dates. Components can accept values from your app and can be asked to perform various commands. The components will, in turn, ask the Windows Phone operating system to perform the commands for them. Sometimes the operating system will have information to pass back to the program. For example, if the operating system is unable to perform the task, it will tell the component that it failed. Your program, in turn, will then be able to check if the command completed successfully or not. The datetime component is an example of a Windows Phone library component that can be used to perform commands. Datetime provides apps with a number of capabilities for working with dates and times. These things that datetime provides to your app are referred to as being exposed. In other words, the datetime exposes a number of different commands and capabilities to your app. One of the items datetime exposes is a property called Now. A property is a named item managed by a component. Properties are also exposed by a component. Properties are data or information managed by the component. You would expect to see properties related to datetimes exposed by a datetime component. you should expect to see properties such as the day of the week, or hour of the day, or the year. Now is a property that always holds the current date and time. Each time a program reads this property, the datetime component fetches the current date and time. This ensures that the datetime in now is always current. You might think about now as a snapshot of the system clock. You can retrieve the date and time from it, as well as the separate elements like the hour, the minutes, and seconds, etc. Let's take a look at another possible use for datetime. Imagine we have a website that will display a page that varies depending upon a month you specify on the URL. In this scenario, you could use datetime to obtain the month and then use that month on the URL. To do this, we can take the month and append it to a URL in our code. In the example shown here, we get the month from the datetime by using datetime.now.month. We can append the month to the end of the URL by using the plus operator. Once we have the full URL with the month, we can store that in target URI as a new URI component. In case you haven't run into a URI before, it's just a superset of URLs. In other words, a URL is just a type of URI. In this demo, we're going to have a little bit of fun with datetime object. So we're back to the familiar My Useful Links view model page where we have already put a debug write line and some breakpoints to play around with it. This time, let's come into the same if statement where the target URI is checked against null. But what we're going to do is reassign the target URI to a different property. So no matter which one we click in the app, it's going to come into here if it's not null. So let's try this. So we do target URI. So what this is going to do is no matter what this value is here, we're going to make it something new. So we have to make it a new URI object, and inside the parentheses we actually put the place that we're going to. So we're going to do HTTP You can pause and type this out yourself. Okay, so what you see that I've done here is I've pre-written a URL, but we're going to put some query information afterwards. We're going to send to this website what country we're in what year, but we're going to dynamically add that using the datetime object. So at the end of this, let's put the plus sign. Now we're going to use a datetime object, but we want .now, and we want to get the year out of it. Now let's add a month. So we need to also create a query string that will get added. So and month equals. Now we add again, and let's do datetime now month. Make sure you close off the rest of the new URI and end the sentence. So if you can see what's going on here, you can hit enter after the plus if you don't have that much room on your screen. So what do you think is going to happen here? It comes into target URI, and then on this line it's going to get reassigned a new value. And the new value is this here. So we're going to take the datetime.now.year, which the computer and the phone gets from internally, and it's always very, very, very accurate up to the moment. So let's run the app and see what happens. The app has launched. Now if we come over to the links page that is using my useful links view model, it should not matter which one I choose. If you remember in the last demos, this was a broken link that we wanted to debug. So if I click it, look at that. We've gone to datetime.com. Now why did that happen? Let's do this. Let's put a stop there. and see what the value actually is without worrying about the actual website. Let's do it again, put a breakpoint there, and we're going to inspect what target URI's value is before it actually navigates. So let it relaunch. Let's slide over to the section and pick anyone, and there's our breakpoint. If you want to inspect the value, you hover the cursor over it and expand the caret. And you can see the whole thing right here. If you wanted to look at it even closer, you can click the text visualizer and get a really good look at it. And there it is. And if you notice, datetime.now.year is 2014, and datetime.now.month is 10. Let's go back to the White Rabbits tradition we discussed earlier. We can use this example and see how we can make decisions based on a date. As you should recall, the greeting is used for the first day of a month. This means we need a means by which we can check if the date is the first day of a given month. If it is the first day of the month, we can log the message White Rabbits to the Visual Studio output pane. Let's break this down further. The first line here you have seen before. Hopefully, you recall that this is simply checking to see if a target URI holds a valid value so that we can navigate to it. In other words, did the user select a valid URL to navigate to? The new code is in the code block that runs if this condition is true. This is the 5 lines of code contained in the curly braces. Using the same technique we used in the first demo, we can also obtain the day of the month as a number. We simply ask the datetime component for the current date. As you should recall, the now property will cause the operating system to get the current date and time and store them in the now property. Once we have the current date, we can get the day specifically. In code, this is datetime.now.day. With that day, we can compare it against the day we are looking for, which is the first or 1. When we compare values for equality in C#, we use the double equal sign. In our example, this reads, if datetime.now.day equals 1, then run the next block of code. The next block of code is represented by everything inside the inner set of curly braces, which is simply the debug.writeLine statement. The block of code that follows the if condition is executed if the comparison equals to true. In this case, if the day is equal to 1, then we will run the debug.writeLine statement. Because the navigate to command is not contained inside of the curly braces, this means it will be run regardless of whether or not the if condition was met. So, after if statement and possibly the debug statement have been run, the navigate call will always be made. Okay, so let's have a little bit more fun with datetime. Let's come back to the code we wrote for the first demo. What if we want the app to go to a particular website on New Year's Day? How would you check for that? So, since we know that datetime will give you a day of month and a day of year, you could do this. Datetime.now. We want to check if it is the first month of the year, right? Remember, the double equal sign means to compare both sides to see if it's true or false. The double and sign will compare both sides of the if statement. You'll see how that works right now. Datetime.now.day. So now we want to make the open and close curly braces, which completes our if statement. So you see what's happening here? First half of the if statement, we're checking for if it's the first day of the month. Right here. Sorry, it's backwards. If it's the first day of the month here, and the first month of the year here, that means it would be New Year's Day. So, in that case, let's just take this top part and put it in there. And here's another little thing that you'll learn to do, is we can comment out that. Right up there where you see the little lines, you can comment it out, or you can type in the double / yourself. And you can uncomment the same way with the one next to it. So because we don't want that to run right now, we're just going to comment it out. And I'm going to put a breakpoint right there. And we're going to see if this is true or false, if it hits it or not. So let's run it. Now, today is not New Year's Day, so it should not hit that breakpoint if I hit the Venice website button. It should go directly to the Venice website. So Venice connected, click it. Sure enough, we went straight to the website and we did not hit there. So how would we be able to check if this really works or not? You can't wait till New Year's Day, and you really don't want to go in and change the phone's clock settings. So instead, what you could do is just make these variables what it is today. So it is the 10th month of the year as I record this, and the 13th day of the month. So now it should go in there. Let's try this now. Click debug. Wait for the emulator to launch. Now let's slide over and pick any one of the links. And there we go. You know that it hit it because it's yellow and the breakpoint was hit. And now we can continue. Happy knowing that our code works for New Year's Day. Just don't forget to come back in here and bring these back to 1. So you could write something like Happy New Year's, or bring the user to a separate page in the app with some really cool coupons or something similar. What if we did this? The 2 pipes means or. So it would mean if today is the first day of the month, or if it's the first month of the year. So that means every month the user would get the coupon page. Or it'll actually open up every day in January. So you got to make sure you use the right conditional. And there we go. Conditional statements or decision structures, such as the if statement, are very powerful and at the core of all software. This type of coding construct allows you to build apps that can change their behavior based on user input and other factors, versus apps that behave the same way every time. As an alternate to the example we explored, you could use code like this to prevent people from accessing an option unless it is New Year's Day. You could potentially expose special app features or capabilities only on special days or time of the day. In this example, I've added an else clause. For this code, it will run at the debug.writeLine statement if it is not New Year's Day. A possible problem with the sample we just looked at is that the code that runs if it's not New Year's Day will always be the same. If we are displaying a message, perhaps it would be better to display the message only a limited number of times. If our app could remember how many times the user had visited the link, then we could change the behavior so that it doesn't repeat forever. To do this, we can use a variable. We've used a variable already in the form of a target URI, but now we will use one that will hold the information, such as a count of how many times the user has used the link. All programming languages use variables to store information. It might be easier to think of a variable as a container or box that holds something. In the case of programming, such a box will hold information or data. To use a variable in C#, you must tell the compiler that you will be using it. This process is referred to as declaring the variable. We must declare the variable BizitCount before we can use it. By declaring the variable, we are telling the C# compiler, I want to use a variable, and I want to be able to call it BizitCount. In addition to telling the compiler that we want to use BizitCount, we should also tell it what type of information the variable will contain. Typical variables might contain text information or strings, or possibly numeric information like floating point numbers or integers. In each case, we must specify which type of data the variable will hold. In this case, we are naming BizitCount and telling the compiler it will hold numeric data that is of the type integer. Integers can hold whole numbers, but not fractional or floating point numbers. Finally, this declaration line sets the initial value to be 0. It is possible to declare a variable without setting the value. If you did this, the variable will be said to be null, which we learned earlier means it is empty without any value. Now that we have declared a variable, we can use it inside our program to keep track of how many times the page has been visited. We will allow our page to be visited once, but after that first visit, it will be ignored. The first part of our new code will test to see if the user has used the link before. To do this, we need to make sure the visit count is still set to 0 it was originally set to. If it is not, then we need to know if the user has visited the link. If the visit count is equal to 0, the if statement will be evaluated to true, and the block of code following it will be executed. The navigate to command is the code we want to run if the link has not been used before. Visit count must be 0 for this line of code to be executed. This code restricts navigation such that a page may only be visited once. If you wanted to allow a different number of visits, you could change the equals equals operator to something like is less than operator. If the variable visit count was set to 0 when this code is executed, the navigation would take place. After this occurs, it is appropriate time to add a 1 to the visit count or increment it. The statement shown here does that for us. When C# executes this line, it will calculate the portion to the right of the equal sign, visit count plus 1, and then take the result and store it in the visit count variable. If visit count is 0 when this runs, C# would evaluate 0 plus 1, which is 1, and then assign that result to visit count. Visit count would now hold the value 1. As you can see, the use of variables is integral to programming and enhancing your apps. Here are a few more important points to understand. Each time a program is run, all of the variables in that program get created and then initialized, which means they get set to their starting values. As the program executes, it can use these valuables or manipulate the values contained in the variables. This means that your Windows Phone or computer are constantly working with variables as they run. When you use variables in your code, you have complete control over what you call them and how you use them. You could potentially completely arbitrary names for your variables, but most programmers follow convention so that they can understand what the variables were used for and how to use them effectively. Okay, now let's have a little bit of fun with an integer and incremental counting. Coming from the last demo, I'm going to get rid of all the date time stuff. And we want to limit the user from going to a website too many times. So how would we do that? Now this class right here starts there. We can add a property, an int, as you had seen in the slides to this. So we're going to call it visit count. So it's int visit count, and we're going to start off with 0. Now, every time the user clicks a link, we want to be able to add 1 to it, assuming they successfully went to the site. So if we know the target URI is not null, then we know they went to the site. So first thing we'll do is we're going to check that visit count. If visit count is less than, let's say, 3 times. Let's open up the block. Going to take the navigation, cut and paste it inside. Now is that enough? No, because this number has not gone up. So what we need to do is we need to add 1 to it before the page navigates away. So we'll do visit count. We could do +1, or you can do this, ++. That is an incrementer. So what that'll do is it'll take the current number and add 1 to it. It also works if you want to do it the other direction. So in our case, we want to do ++. So now let's try it. To run the app, we'll go to a website 3 times and see what happens. Here's our first attempt. Okay, good. Went to the site. Here's our second attempt. Okay, good. Third attempt.
All right. Now we know the number is getting there, right? Fourth attempt. Nothing happened. That's because that number is actually 4. So what we can do to see what's going on is if we put a breakpoint here and come back to the app and click it again, it's going to breakpoint there. If you hover over it, you can see the value. The value is currently 3, and therefore it'll escape. So let's click the step over and see what actually happens. See how it did not go inside the code block. And you can use the same type of logic for, let's say you want to see if it's the first day of the month. You don't necessarily have to check date time now. You could do this. If date time now day is greater than 1, because that's a White Rabbit special. We go to the regular site. Then we can do else. Go to White Rabbit special. There's another way you could apply the logic as well. We could do the is not equal to. So there are several different ways you can implement logic that will give you the same results.
Using a visit counter in this manner opens the door for quite a myriad of different things we could do. If we use a counter in conjunction with the datetime component, we could limit access to pages based on a date or time. We could restrict access to a page until it is used 3 times. Or perhaps you might want to allow access to a page only every other visit. Use of variables to store data and make decisions based on that data is really the core of any piece of software or app on your phone. Today, you learned a lot more about what you can do in a Windows Phone app. You learned some core fundamentals of programming through the use of variables, decision structures, and library components. Using all of these things together is the foundation for building anything you wish into your app. In this lab assignment, you will put into practice the things we discussed in this module. You'll use the datetime component to build a URL and navigate to that URL. You will then add some conditional logic that changes the behavior of the app based on whether or not it is a particular date.